Okay, Vinod, whenever you're ready.
Thanks, Jenna. Welcome everyone to this webinar on how do we build systems for care and support when the world is forced into going digital and those we serve don't have access. My name is Vinod Rajasekaran. I'm publisher and CEO of Future of Good, a fast-growing digital publication covering stories, innovations, and trends shaping social impact in Canada. Our readers and members are impact-focused professionals and entrepreneurs tackling a range of issues across the country. And at this time, we've really leaned into bringing news updates, unexpected solutions, and examining the effects of the pandemic on the social impact sector, the systems we live in, and on our society. And I'm really excited to host this panel and moderate this panel with folks who are really navigating the new reality of digital service delivery. So I'll turn it over to Jenna to welcome everyone formally and do our land acknowledgement.
Hi, everyone. I'm Jenna. I'm the community specialist here at Future of Good, and I'm so excited that we have over 100 people on this webinar right now to discuss this important issue. So thank you, everyone, for making time out of your day for this. We also have all of the Future of Good staff with us here. So they're denoted as co-hosts in the event, and they have Future of Good after their name. So if you're having any problems or any issues, please feel free to direct message one of them, and they should be able to help you. And I will be collecting questions through the chat, so you can just post them publicly in the chat, and I'll grab them so that our panelists can answer them at the end. And yeah, we're really counting on a really great participant experience here. So if at any time you see something that's inappropriate or anything like that, please just let us know. We need you all to make this a fantastic event. So as we continue forward, I'd like to step into a land acknowledgement. I want to start today's webinar by acknowledging that Future of Good operates on unceded and unsurrendered Algonquin territory in Ottawa, Ontario. The purpose of this land acknowledgement is to acknowledge that as a non-Indigenous settler, that this is unsurrendered land, and it speaks to the continued injustice and inequitable practices between Canada and the original peoples of this land. I'd like you all to take a moment with me. Please ground your feet onto the land where you are. If you're sitting, place your feet on the floor and close your eyes. And just take a moment to connect to the land that you're on, the unsurrendered territory of your home, of your internet provider, and of your grocery store. Reflect upon the fact that you are currently inside of a safe shelter, with the ability to safely distance from others, and the difficulties you would face if you had a long-term drinking water advisory on your home, like over 60 Indigenous communities are living through on a regular basis. Or if your home was a multi-family dwelling without the ability to isolate the sick, as is the living arrangements of many Indigenous communities. Reflect upon how we have access to the internet, allowing us to participate in this panel discussion today, that you have a personal computer or a smartphone, when there are many people across the country who lack this utility that is vital for the 21st century life. Many of them live in Indigenous communities where gaining reliable and affordable broadband access is a matter of cultural survival. Reflect upon how moving forward, you can be more connected to reconciliation and to the privilege we innately have to live and work from our home on the unceded lands we have built our security and life on. Thank you so much. I'll pass it back to Vinod.
Thank you so much, Jenna, for that welcome and thoughtful land acknowledgement. Let me introduce our panelists very quickly, and then we can get into our discussion. Nasma Ahmed is the director of the Digital Justice Lab, an initiative focused on building a more just and equitable digital future. Maureen James manages the Community Investment Program at the Canadian Internet Registry Authority, CIRA, which funds innovative community internet projects to build a resilient, trusted, and secure internet for all Canadians. Landon Hoyt is the director of the Binners Project, a grassroots group of waste pickers, aided by support staff dedicated to improving their economic opportunities and reducing the stigma as they face informal recyclable collectors. Joanna Kerr is CEO of Tides Canada, an organization dedicated to providing uncommon solutions for the common good by helping Canadians secure a healthy environment in ways that promote social equity and economic prosperity. Janet Fitzsimmons is Manager, Grassroots Leadership Strategies at Connected Communities and has over 20 years of local grassroots community development experience. And last but not least, we have Deirdre Gibson with Orillia's Lighthouse, serving Orillia's homeless and vulnerable population since 1992. The Lighthouse provides a safe place that meets physical needs, gives spiritual hope, and points the way to wellness. What an amazing group of panelists. So really excited to host this. And let me tell you a bit about sort of why we're here. The experience of using technology has been unimaginably accelerated for everyone, especially the most vulnerable. Nonprofits, social service agencies, really civil society organizations of all kinds have been undergoing digital transformation in a matter of days and weeks, responding to the needs of individuals, families, and communities who have been propelled online. And there's some really important questions and consequences of all of this. What is this new normal? How do we feel about it? What are the benefits of this in the short term? Are there any disadvantages? And how would you feel if you were working this way in a year's time? And what are some of the trade-offs that we're making? These are the types of questions our panelists will dive into, and we'll take your questions as it comes in, and Jenna will forward them. We'll have a look, and if they're really juicy questions, we'll sort of throw them to the panelists right away, and if not, we can also sort of come back to some questions toward the end. Friendly reminder to have everyone on mute so that we can hear all the panelists, and let's keep the questions going. There's some polls underway as well, so be a really exciting chat. Nasma, let's start with you. The digital divide is not new. Give us some historical context here and some analysis from your perspective on the ground.
Hi, everybody. So my name is Nasma Ahmed from Digital Justice Lab, and thank you so much for asking that question. I think it's important to note that, and something that I say all the time, is that technology in many ways replicates the same systematic inequalities that we have in our physical realities, right? So the digital divide, we say always that this is a new normal. For a lot of communities, this was the normal, right? And this was their lived experiences, whether it be the inability to afford internet access on the cellular device, to not having the technological tools to participate. In many cases, we've created piecemeal alternatives, right, to deal with the issue. So in many cases, people have always said, go to the library, right? And that's the way you access a computer and the internet. Or, you're at the Tim Hortons and you're able to access Wi-Fi. Or, you have a schooling system to be able to access digital tools. And so this is actually normal for a lot of folks, especially folks who are, in lower income situations, who may do not have access to employment, who are on ODSP, for example. And I think the really important thing to share is that, for example, a really great program, a really great research project out of Acorn Canada shared that if you are on ODSP, you can be spending upwards of 1/10 of your income trying to access the internet, right? And so I think what we're seeing right now is just a highlighting, and I think we've seen this across the board, not just a highlighting of the issues around the digital divide, but the issues around housing, the issues around affordability. Sorry, I just muted myself, but I'm outside, so it's a little bit louder. So I think it's important to note that in most cases, the people who are most impacted by this, as always, are the most vulnerable of communities. And that in many cases, even though right now we deem internet access a basic utility that we should all have access to, that is not the case for remote communities. That is not the case for urban areas, especially folks who are living in community housing. So a good example of that and how that's shared is within community housing, you do have access to the internet, but it is actually, you get a cheaper plan. And the cheaper plan actually has lower speeds and has a cap, right, on the gigs. So you can imagine if you are all now stuck at home and you have your phone and you only have a cap to how much you could use, but also the speed, you might not be able to access a tool like Zoom, for example, because Zoom actually takes a lot of data. And so, you know, it's important to note that this is not something new in any way, shape, or form, but now we're just seeing it expanded, right? And, you know, now we don't have access to the public tools that we used to have access to. So how do we ensure now that people have it within their homes? And that's going to be the really difficult conversation, because not everyone can move online. And also the hard part that people don't talk about is also the language issues that come with moving online, right? You might not have access to tools that actually have the translations that you need, for example. And so it's even beyond the actual technical infrastructure, right? It's the societal impacts and the connections to even language that is very difficult for people to recognize that we don't have a lot of that in our digital atmosphere, right? So I think that's like a long story short of this is sadly a normal for a lot of folks. And what we're seeing right now is organizations that did not necessarily have to deal with it too much, or like in many cases knew that it was a problem, but they were dealing with it because they had their physical spaces where people could come visit, for example, and you know they were able to give out tools. I think a lot of those organizations that were front lines are now dealing with something that a lot of them did not expect to deal with, right? And so we're dealing right now with a lot of rapid response, so around digital security, around what are low-tech tools that they can be using, because actually not everyone can be using Zoom. Some folks just need to be able to call on the phone, and telling people that it's okay, like you could just use a cellular device, like it's fine. You don't have to always use Zoom. And so we're dealing now with just capacity building problem, right? Of like being able to switch really fast. So I think a lot of folks knew that this was going to be a pressing issue as time passed, but now they have no choice because there's no physical space where people can come visit them. So I think right now the rapid response is really difficult. And also just how do people apply for jobs, right? When they might not have the tools to apply for a job online, for example, right? And so there's like a lot of bigger questions that are coming up. And for us, what we're trying to really do is the rapid response work when we can, but also doing the public education work as much as possible. But it's very hard to balance because you're also dealing with organizations that have to ensure that people have food, right? And housing. So it's kind of hard to have a tech conversation sometimes when you actually really want to make sure that they have access to food and access to healthcare, et cetera. So that's the long story.
Yeah, thank you, Nasma. Maureen, I'll turn to you now. Nasma mentioned capacity and infrastructure. CIRA's mission, the work that you're doing in many ways is about funding projects that close the digital divide. And you're actually embarking on some new research in this space. Could you talk to us a little bit about that? And I know that in particular, there are some really exciting and important projects happening in remote communities around internet access.
For sure. Thanks, Vinod. I'm really happy to be here, and thanks, Nasma, for laying it all out. Wow. Yes, we've got some issues. CIRA, Canadian Internet Registration Authority, manages the .ca domain, so keeping it safe, stable, and secure for all Canadians. That's what we do full-time. But we also provide funding for community internet projects, many of which right now are helping to fill some of those gaps that Nasma identified in internet access, infrastructure, and digital literacy. But as we've seen over the last few weeks, COVID has brought into stark relief how much more needs to be done to confront the unequal access to the internet issues in Canada. It remains too expensive, or just totally unavailable for many Canadians, even though the government has declared it a basic service back in 2016, like water, like power. We know the majority of households in Canada's Indigenous communities and rural communities do not have access to basic internet service. And in cities, just like Nasma was saying, we have a stat that is 11% of Canadians who find themselves choosing between food and home internet because our rates are so expensive. Even though the access is pretty much universally available in urban centers as compared to rural and urban, it's a huge, serious issue. And it's just going to go up. That percentage is just going to go up as a result of what the pandemic is doing right now to our economy. So one of the things that I'm really excited about talking about today, and which you've just asked about, Vinod, is our Community Investment Program grants. That program exists at CIRA. Annually, we fund projects that focus on things like access, infrastructure, digital literacy, cybersecurity, and advocacy around these issues. So we've funded about 151 projects to date. We are currently reviewing our annual selection of projects that have come in for this year, and we'll be doing the same thing again next year. So I think one of the things I really love people to take away from this conversation is there is funding for these kinds of things. This situation is going to drive ideas, inspiration, new needs, all those kind of things. So I mean, I guess if that's a silver lining of what's happening right now, there will be more interesting projects to help people get online, and we really do want to hear about them. So we have a website, cira.ca/grants. You can go there and get more information about the kinds of things we fund. And I think the other really important challenge that we're facing right now, as one of the few institutions that does do specifically focused internet funding in Canada, we want to find who our friends are in this space. We also want to get really good data on what are the needs. So as you mentioned, Vinod, we are undertaking a research project exactly right now, in fact. So all of those community organizations and funders and researchers that are, I'm sure, just looking for more to do. We have a set of questions that we're asking about what the priorities are, where funding already exists, so that we can get a real picture of the situation in Canada, so that we know where the gaps are, and then we can actually take that opportunity to engage other potential philanthropy agencies or people that can provide support in the conversation about what the needs are and how we can meet them. So that's a bit of a rundown from my perspective.
Yeah, thank you, Maureen. I think you'll get lots of good insights here from the discussion. Janet, I'll turn it over to you to give us a really sort of sharp and stark sort of ground view. What's your journey been like transitioning to digital services and supports? What's the kind of feedback that you're getting from members you're supporting and serving about going digital?
So it's been interesting. So Center for Connected Communities, my role at Center for Connected Communities is to work with grassroots leaders to develop community development strategies that work on the ground in neighborhoods. And so I'm in touch with grassroots leaders who reside in a variety of neighborhoods all across Toronto. And last week, I guess it was, we had a Zoom meeting we have a network of 54 grassroots leaders, and we had a Zoom meeting, and we thought, oh, I wonder how this is going to go. We had over 20 people participate in various different ways, and that was really great. But I mean, basically what everyone else just said. I mean, this is, some of our folks are calling this the great equalizer because they feel like a lot of the inequities that they've been living with for years are suddenly, front and center. They feel like, power and hierarchy are in sharper focus than ever. And those things are really starting to be recognized. But, I mean, it's great that we got 20 something people to a Zoom meeting. The truth is that a couple of weeks from now, people are going to be juggling bills, and they're going to get to the point where they're like, do I feed my kids or do I get internet access? And they're going to feed their kids. And we know that. And it's not only internet access, it's also phones, right? So what happens to people? They're not supposed to go outside, right? They're supposed to stay in their homes. What happens when their phones get cut off, right? How isolated are they? And so if they can't get access, if they can't get a smartphone, if they can't get online, to kind of echo what Nasma said, lots of our people access technology in public spaces, right? And that's the norm for them. And that allows them to be really effective advocates and leaders in their communities. The folks we're working with are hearing, they're getting calls from their neighbors. They're known as leaders in their community. So they're getting calls from their neighbors saying things, everything from, do you know what grocery store has milk to, I need to do laundry and I'm afraid to use the elevator. Is that safe? Without those tools, how is that going to happen, right? And how many people will be impacted by that? Yeah, I'll stop there, but there'll be more.
Thank you, Janet. Landon, I want to sort of pick up from here, and you know, you've had to quickly rethink how you support your members through digital means. There's a range of supports that that you offer, from meetings to education to engagement. What have the challenges been from your end, and how are you overcoming them?
Sure. Thanks for having me. Happy to contribute to this conversation a bit. Just to give a bit of context, so at Binners Project, we support people that bin, so waste pickers, bottle collectors, people that are returning bottles and cans for refunds. And basically our programs, the biggest part of our program, the most important part, is a weekly meeting on Tuesday nights where we have 50 to 70 binners coming to share about what's going on in the community, provide updates about things that they've heard, seen in the community, us giving information, getting feedback from them, that sort of thing. And then the second half of it is about receiving income opportunity shifts through our social enterprise program. So we work with a number of buildings and public events in Vancouver to do their public waste sorting. So we actually do back of house waste sorting for like the convention center and things. And so that's providing, we're assigning about 50 income opportunities per week. And those are, over minimum wage paying shifts that people in the community that are members of our program can benefit from. And so that Tuesday night meeting is the crux of our programming, and it's an in-person, face-to-face sort of interaction. It's about connecting with one another, checking in with each other, as well as having those income opportunities available. So with COVID-19, we've had to shut down our social enterprise program. So we are out 50 income opportunities per week. And then we're also not getting that crucial touch point with each other, which has been a real challenge. And so we are still having the Tuesday meeting, but it's pared down. It's very simplified. We're doing social distancing, all of that. And we're having to turn to other sort of ways to stay connected. And most of our members have access to some sort of phone. It's generally not, a phone that they can get onto Zoom with or something like that. It's probably just, a basic sort of smartphone at the very most. And so we're trying to innovate our systems a bit so that we can have some of our binner staff, which we have about 25 of, run some of help us stay connected with each other. And so right now, actually this week, we're setting up we call them like phone trees, so that we can assign some binner staff a list of numbers, call some of the members each week, and just make sure that they're okay, make sure that they have access to food, health care, that they're checking in with their family and friends, whatever it might be. And so, we're trying to stay on top of what's happening and innovate a little bit with our programs when the main crux of our program is that face-to-face weekly meeting that we've really lost now, and we're telling people many of our vendors have to actually stay home because we know that it's a risk coming out, and they're already over 60 immunocompromised, living in SRO buildings, that sort of thing. So it's really about finding creative ways to innovate, and it's even harder when like Nasma said, those libraries are closed, those community centers are closed or limited service, all those. So those are often places that we are referring people to go to. So it's been a challenge, and we're a very low tech sort of organization, I want to say. So it's even more challenging to now switch and pivot to, stay connected.
Thanks, Landon. Deirdre, over to you. Really keen to hear about your experiences in Orillia with a small nonprofit delivering, critical services, shelter, food, and the linkages to a whole range of other services to adjacent rural townships and to one First Nation.
Okay, great. I can do nothing but sing praises of the CIRA opportunity. So we are really dealing with homeless people. And I can tell you that in a bizarre way, COVID has been a really good trial run for us, because we have an approved grant application from CIRA. And by the way, CIRA will let you ask for training money, like for your staff. Because before COVID, we were reliant on building trust between our staff and our homeless people, because they had no access to anything. Sometimes they could get into the library in competition with school kids. Like that didn't work very well for us. So along comes COVID. Panic. We've got a 14-bed shelter. We feed 200 people at lunch. We've got a community lunch program. And you know what? We just kept on asking. And I would say that to anyone who's listening, keep asking for help from CIRA, from these larger organizations. Like we're in a community of 26,000 people. We are always asking for help. And we found when we did our CIRA application, we got someone who was such a technical expert. It was a link we made through Rotary, and she helped us articulate what we needed so we could describe it well to CIRA, so then they'd fund us. So we've got the money, and can I say this? Like it's $80,000. Like this isn't a $5,000 grant that we're all pursuing, but it's good money. So we were in our current shelter. It's cheek by jowl. Like there's no social distancing, and so a local hotel offered us rooms because of course they're not renting rooms. So great. So we pack off. We have 16 beds. Somehow we got up to 30 vulnerable individuals. And all of a sudden, they were in a really nice hotel, and it had free Wi-Fi. So our journey became, instead of making them reliant on staff, it was having them understand their mobile phones, and they've loved it. Like those of you who deal with vulnerable people, they often come with social problems. And I'll tell you, nobody's making social problems for us in the hotel, because they want to stay there. They want to learn about how they can make their phones do things, how they're not having to rely on staff to look for listings for housing. And I'll tell you, we've had 2 people find permanent housing since they were in the hotel. Like usually our staff have to do it. Our staff are monitoring, always looking, connecting. They have to facilitate. So this whole issue about privacy, it relates back to building trust, because our population is so vulnerable that often their first step to being connected is that they have to trust a staff person to do it for them. So this is a big step for us. And through our CIRA grant, our whole campus is going to become Wi-Fi, and everyone's going to be able to get on it. And so we're moving to a 40-bed shelter and 20 units of supportive housing and staff space. So and here we are in a rural community, because we serve the 4 adjacent townships and 1 First Nation. We couldn't have done this without CIRA. And sure, the town had helped. They made a wireless connection in downtown Orillia. But guess what? We're not downtown. So I can only stress enough, like the CIRA program is good. Because the next opening is January, that'll give you time to find the right expert or the right volunteer to help you write it. And you're allowed to talk to them ahead of time. So it's a really exciting program. And maybe if enough of new applications come in, they'll be able to get their budget increased, because the ability to connect is so important to people that are vulnerable, and it's giving the power and the dignity back to them. It's a wonderful program and worth working hard to achieve. So that's all I'll say for now.
Thank you so much, Deirdre. Love the sort of the experience and the impact that you talked about. I want to bring something back to Nasma probably, and you mentioned privacy, and a few folks have mentioned privacy. So I want to go back to you, Nasma, on that. Privacy was a hot topic before physical distancing and before COVID, but now it's of vital importance in service delivery. What are the considerations and actions you've taken to support folks when it comes to privacy? What should folks keep in mind?
Yeah, so privacy, it was a hot topic beforehand as people started to learn more about big technology companies and the issues that were starting to arise. And I'd say also during COVID, I think what's been really interesting to see is in many cases, people think that people are trying to focus on privacy, but also really want to ensure that they're doing their jobs, right? Because they're now having to do direct service delivery online. And so I think that, like, for example, we're seeing the increase of like Zoom bombing, for example, when you're using the Zoom platform. I have a lot of people that we're working with that have been like their websites have been hacked or all the different things that have occurred. And so I think the biggest thing, for us is like, once again, capacity building, doing the digital security protocols of like, what is the most important thing for you, right? Because I think that, yes, there are security concerns that come with Zoom, but if that is the best way that you can connect at the moment, that might be the risk you're willing to take, right? So really being able to do those risk assessments, just like you would do in your physical environment. I can send over some tools around that of like questions to ask yourselves and like ask your organization and the capacities that you have. I think also what we're seeing is that people are also quickly noticing that in this moment, we go quickly to like the larger tech companies, right? There are actually pretty cool platforms that you can actually run your own servers. Obviously you need someone that has a technical support to like provide that for you. But for example, Jitsi is an end-to-end encrypted open source video platform tool that you could use, and you can actually run your own server. And so there are tools out there, but the hard part is when you're dealing with open source technology, you do need extra sometimes support to make that happen. And I think there are folks there that are willing to support. We've been trying to help people do that in some cases as well. But obviously resources, it's hard. So I think that the biggest question is like doing a risk assessment of like, what are your greatest concerns, right? So based as an organization, like what are the risks in using the tool that you're using? Also, I think people are trying to find new technical tools to do things. And so sometimes it hasn't been tested very well. And so before you go using an emerging technology, like, double check beforehand, read the privacy policies, check in with people that that are more privacy aware. And I think also the third piece is around the data, right? So there's gonna be a lot of data capture that's gonna be occurring. And there's also gonna be a lot of funders that are gonna be asking about the data piece. And so it's important for you to also make sure that there's a data minimization that's occurring, right? Because yes, we wanna be able to highlight the issues that are occurring, but we do not want to be sharing, obviously, personally identifiable information. As always, this just because we're in crisis does not mean that we do personally identifiable information. There has to be an informed consent when you're talking about data that is being collected for whatever purpose it's being collected for. That intent should be very clear, and also who you're sharing it with, where it's stored. All of those conversations really have to come into play because, once again, the mass amounts of data that will be collected in this period of time is going to be larger than ever before because we are all online, we are connected online, we're doing everything online. And so just being really clear about your data practices as well, and also who you're sharing that data with, right? And that's a huge conversation, especially when you're dealing with vulnerable populations. Just because we're in crisis mode right now, just because we're in a pandemic does not necessarily mean that we need to absolve the privacy conversation, right? And kind of push it to the side for, public health reasons. That is not the case because the people who are the most impacted at all times is the most vulnerable. So yeah, just there are protocols that you can follow. But once again, I think the difficulties that a lot of organizations are going to face, and they have been facing this beforehand, is just the resourcing to do that work. Right? And to do that work well. And I don't blame organizations for, having struggles with that because it takes a lot of resources to do that work well. And it takes a lot of resources to think through all the privacy pieces, right? And so I think that really ensuring that if, funders who are in this conversation, people who provide support to civil society organizations, to recognize that this tech piece is super important in ensuring that, first of all, there are good practices now, but also good practices for the future, right? We don't know what the future holds at this moment, but I think that there has been a lack of conversation sometimes around that capacity building around the technical side. And now more than ever before, it is important. So how do we get into good practices, right? How do we use this opportunity to maybe push back around certain data collection, maybe practice data minimization, be more privacy aware when we can. And it's not going to happen right away. We are in crisis mode. So I think people are focusing on the right things right now. And there's the rest of us that can help support that and support us in, you know, making sure that we aren't creating this other big system that can impact us in a different way.
Could I just
Super. Thank you. Yeah, go ahead, Maureen.
Everything that Nasma said, yes. I think it's a complicated time. I think what's happening with COVID that people are experiencing right now is a lot more potential for cyber attacks and actual cyber attacks, phishing attempts, disinformation all over the place. So there's a lot to be wary of. I mean, it's just kind of gone up, you know, exponentially. One of the things that CIRA has figured out about this, we develop cybersecurity products mainly for larger institutions like schools and hospitals and that kind of thing. But we also have a new product that is in its launch phase that we decided to offer for free to individuals, nonprofits, schools, businesses, small businesses, you know, for the duration. You can find out information about it on our website, right on the front page, CIRA.ca. It's called Canadian Shield. And it's a thing that you can install right at home on your laptop, on your phone, on your devices, and it helps. It gives you another layer of protection for your family and the stuff that you're doing at home, which is all of us now at this point. So I just wanted to add that that's a resource that we've made available for Canadians to take advantage of right now.
Super, thank you. Joanna, I want to turn to you. Tide supports a number of initiatives across the country, but really curious sort of what, you know, what's on your mind. We've talked about affordability, we talked about, you know, digital attention, privacy, etc. All through this time, digital attention is going up, and there are serious consequences of that. I can think of sort of mental health being sort of one consequence, and there are Tide's initiatives, I'm sure, that that are really sort of thinking about, you know, how they transition to digital services at this time. Tell us a bit about what you're thinking and considering.
Yeah, I just wanted to first thank Vinod, you and Future of Good for bringing together these amazing change makers. It's a privilege to be with you all. I guess one thing I wanted to just leap on what Nasma was saying is that there are now a set of guiding principles that funders across Canada are looking at. And again, I can share with you all these after. It's a real opportunity for you all to push back to your funders if they haven't already offered. But there's a real effort on behalf of a lot of grant makers to be far more flexible and to remove some of the restrictions that were on grants. So as we move into digital and need to have more capacity to move into this new era, that your current grants could be applied to do that. And so I'm on many calls with many different funding agencies, and you're hearing very much that they want to provide as much flexibility as possible, help groups, you know, leading from behind and support groups, and to amplify these voices at the front lines. I guess the other thing though is that, you know, some groups are finding it no problem actually moving to digital. It's really, I think many people have talked about what does it mean to stay connected? Everybody's desperately trying to stay connected and maintain trusted relationships across the communities with which they serve. And people are evolving and being really super innovative in how they do that. And this is going to be a very, very fluid time. It's going to constantly evolve. But it's the mental health issues that we've got to really watch for. I mean, the isolation is absolutely profound. And certainly with so many of the organizations and communities that we work remote that are Indigenous, where physical distancing is just not a reality. But you've got massive food, obviously internet scarcity, bandwidth scarcity, but massive food scarcity is also emerging. So how to stay connected, how to really innovate and make sure that that kind of mental health issue is being looked at, you know, right from the get-go. And so we're seeing more grant makers also increasing funding for mental health, and certainly some of the grant makers that we work for. But there's also a real need for us, I think, as a collective.
Hello?
Scaling back on their grant making. So the more we can just hold on together, and again, keep asking your funders to increase their funding in order for the COVID response, I think we will stay the course.
Sure. Thank you, Joanna. I think we may have heard a little sort of, you know, you sort of cut out and come back in, but it's all good. I think we caught that. Thanks for that perspective. We've got a really thank you. I've got a really good question here for the panel, and I'm going to go to this question first, and then sort of come back to a sort of a closing question. But maybe I'll direct this at Nasma first. What can we learn from other countries on tech access to get the economics right? You know, pre-COVID, you know, you could land in South America or Sub-Saharan Africa or the EU and buy a SIM card for 20 cents, install it in a factory unlocked, really inexpensive smartphone, and buy quite a significant sort of data plan with no commitment for 1 month, 2 months, 3 months. What can we learn from other countries on tech access?
I think that this is a funny thing because actually a couple of years ago, I remember I met someone who was actually their focus was just internet access. And I said I was from Canada. He laughed. He's like, wow, y'all have the most expensive internet plans. And I was like, yes, I pay for that. So I think that there is a lot to learn from our counterparts, but I think the most important thing actually is to recognize that we do have the resources here to make that happen. So that's the unfortunate thing, but it's true. We have the resources to actually make internet access affordable. A lot of our taxpayer dollars subsidize the internet infrastructure that exists, right? And so I think the one thing I would say, instead of actually learning from our, international counterparts, is to recognize that we actually have the technical infrastructure and also the economic infrastructure to ensure that we have affordable internet access. Is there political will? That's another question, right? And I think at the moment, in 2016, it was deemed a basic utility, but we're still seeing the struggle for the fight for internet access for all. And so I think that what we can use this moment for is to actually push for that political will, to ensure that we do have access across the board, that we're not having, low speed access if you're in an urban area and living in community housing, that, even if you're not in a public space, you should be able to have access. Even if you are unhoused, right, you should be able to have a device that supports that. So I think that instead of saying that, hey, like what's happening in the international space, yes, we have one of the most expensive internet plans in the world, right? And for a country this size, but also with this economic power, it is unfathomable in many ways that we are still stuck in the situation that we're in right now. And so I think we should use this moment. In many cases, open media is doing a lot of advocacy around internet access for all, same with Acorn Canada. So, if there are ways that you can tag in with those organizations that are doing, we're going to be working with them as well to really support the political will piece, because that is the big part, right? And we're not seeing that just for internet access. We're seeing that for a lot of the issues right now that are getting support, is that once the political will is there, it will happen. And so, really all of us together being able to provide that support and advocacy, I think is going to be super important as we move forward, because it is unfortunate that we're still in the scenario that we're in. And sadly really disappointing, right? And so I think that that's the one piece, is that, hey, international partners are already doing their thing, right? So we have the resources here to make it happen. And so how do we push for the political will? And also recognizing, I just want to share this out to everybody, is that yes, you know, all these technical tools are going to be coming out and you may not know how to navigate that. There are a lot of resources that will support you in doing so, right? And so I think that the translation and being able to connect the work to the digital side of things, there are folks here, whether it's Digital Justice Lab, folks at CIRA, a lot of organizations who are able to handle the kind of the in-between spaces that a lot of folks are in. And so, yeah, I think the biggest thing is going to be advocacy for the next little while, is just really pushing on ISED, CRTC, other partners to be able to actually, you know, get going.
Super, thank you. I want to sort of loop back to one very quick question. Janet, I'm going to sort of turn to you. And something you said, you know, you mentioned power and hierarchy are in sharper focus than ever. Take us through what you meant there. How is power and privilege playing into digital service delivery right now? What are you seeing?
Sure. So what we're seeing with the grassroots leaders that we're working with is that the social service sector in this moment of crisis sort of went, okay, so there's the sector and there are residents who have needs. And there's this third thing, which is grassroots leaders who are actually the bridge between the two. And those are the folks that we work with. And they are being largely left out of the conversation. And they are, to sort of touch on a few things that have been said, to Deirdre's point about trust. These are the people who have trust with hyper-local networks in their neighborhoods, who can speak to people who I could never speak to, who the sector could never speak to or reach. And they can get to those people. They have numbers for those people, or they have ways of connecting. And they very, very much want to be part of the solution. They very much want, I mean, I can only speak to our local, I've spoken to people, I've actually spoken to colleagues in Victoria and Nova Scotia in the last week, and this is not a Toronto problem, because this is happening in other places as well. But I think that, you know, we go back to, oh, there's an emergency management crisis and we need to focus in really, really sharp. And what happens is that we leave out some of the people whose skills we have invested in, right? Whose capacities have been built for just such a moment. And so, you know, the people who, as I said earlier, the 20-something people who made it to that Zoom call, you know, I'm sure it wasn't easy for all of them. I know their situations, and I'm sure for many of them, you know, it wasn't easy to you know, find access, but also to find a quiet, private space in your home where you can actually be part of a Zoom call, right? When you're maybe, you know, sharing with a couple of roommates, or you've got, you know, a large family in a small space kind of thing. And so I think supporting those people to continue to build out that connectivity in their neighborhoods is going to be critical. We need local solutions. And I know when we talk about digital, we talk about, you know, we think globally, but without those local solutions and without those people having access, a lot of things will fall apart, right, in neighborhoods. That it's a critical piece. And so I just wanted to make sure that I highlighted that.
Sure. Thank you. We're going to get to a couple more questions. Before we do that, I want to sort of just have a wrap-up question for the panelists very quickly. What is one thing you're hoping for will change for good when it comes to digital post-pandemic? What is one opportunity this crisis presents in your mind? And we'll kick off with you, Joanna.
Oh, there's so many things that I think are changing that will be good. I think that the future is local, and that the seeds of solutions are locally found, and that we are going to be saving lives locally, and that we will be working much more effectively in communities. And so whether we're doing that entirely digitally, but I think our you know, whether it's supply chains, whether it's about changing the face of work, it's about our relationship to food and community. I think there are some positive things that are going to come of this, but so we've got to hold on to that. Thanks, Vinod.
Super, thank you. Landon?
Sure, yeah. As I said earlier, I think, you know, we're kind of pivoting a lot of our systems to ensure that there's that connectivity in place in the absence of face-to-face interactions, which our programs really, really depend on. And I think, you know, one example of this is, you know, realizing that, you know, our programs we were started as a collective of binners who are binning on a regular basis, which can be unsafe. It's not necessarily a stable income. You know, when they go to the depots, they're getting different amounts every time because they're collecting different amounts of bottles. But in this pandemic world, we're not stopping drinking. You know, it may actually be more because we're drinking at home now, and residential bins are more easily accessible to binners than commercial ones and restaurant ones are. And so we're actually pivoting our program to maybe refocus on some of those efforts a little bit more than our social enterprise program, and rethinking how technology can maybe help that and aid in that process. And one of those crucial examples is advocating to the province and such right now to keep to designate bottle depots as essential services, because they are a survival source of income for the people that we work with on a regular basis. And so I'm happy to say that it was done in BC. They're on the list of essential services, which is great as long as they're able to maintain physical distancing and things. But one of the key things is that there's a big push to move those to express, which means you drop your bottles off and they get counted and deposited automatically into a bank account, direct deposit. And many binners don't have bank accounts or access to bank accounts. And so a huge piece of us is advocating to maintain a cash option that's lower tech for the binners. And so that's something that we are really pushing for. And I think that it's crucially important in a post-pandemic sort of world, because that's, you know, there's going to be people that don't trust the systems, privacy issues, all those sorts of things, and we have to maintain that cash option. And that's just one example of that, but I think it's kind of a larger sort of theme.
Super, thank you. Deirdre, over to you.
I think that I'm just thankful that you've done this seminar today. You know, that it's even more important that we as the professionals that are helping the most vulnerable continue to communicate and continue to share best practices so we can reach out to the people we are serving.
Great, thank you. Maureen, one thing you're hoping will change for good?
Well, I think the thing I'm most excited about that people are saying is post-pandemic, like this is ending, right? This is not forever. Can you tell I'm already kind of, it's wearing thin. I think that one of the most important things that is going to come out of this is that we know this, but nobody is ever going to question high quality internet as a basic service required for everyday life. So if this inspires internet users, community groups, every level of government, you know, internet service providers to all step up and try to solve these gaps, I think amazing. Like it took this, and that's unfortunate, but you know, hopefully that's what it's going to push. So I'm looking forward to that. And of course, the creativity of people that solve these problems themselves, as we are talking about in the communities we work with, those are the ones we want to hear from with their ideas through our community investment program grants when the next round opens. So I'd leave that as positive thoughts.
Super, thank you. Janet.
I think that we are forging new relationships. The thing I hope for the most is that digital connectivity will be considered a human right, because I think without it, we lose people. And who do we lose? We lose the most vulnerable people, always. And I think that for me and my work particularly, I think the opportunity to really amplify the voice of grassroots leaders and to shine a light on the impact that they're having locally, I think is really important right now.
Wonderful, thank you. And last but not least, Nasma.
Hi, so I think it's important to note that the concept of digital justice came from the idea that communication is a human right. And so I'm excited to see the localized networks that are going to exist, the mesh networks, like community internet infrastructure that's going to be created in this period of time. I think about like organizations like National Capital Freenet and a lot of TO Mesh. So I'm hoping that this can hopefully create more resources and support for localized community internet infrastructure moving forward. But I think for me, what I'm excited for, you know, I think about Miriam Kaba, who always says like hope is a discipline. And what I'm excited for is that we all see ourselves in like the possibilities around technology, right? So like creating localized options, creating community alternatives to the tools that we use, finding ways to think about what we imagine for privacy. So I think we all see ourselves now that we have to use the tools more often. And so I'm excited for the conversations that are kind of come up of like what we want to see for our digital futures as well. And obviously I'm hoping in the last case is beyond the digital infrastructure that people are housed, that people have access to food, and that we continue to see that as a human right moving forward.
Super, thank you. We have a ton of questions, but we're not going to go through everyone. But I'm just going to pick one question that is super juicy, and I'm going to direct it to Joanna, and then I'll turn it over to Jenna to wrap up. The discussion around this focusing on the political will that Nasma spoke about. I wonder how much responsibility also lies at the private sector's door. And in particular, the monopolies that exist in this sector. How should the private sector be stepping up? And what can the philanthropic sector and the social impact sector do as a part of that?
Yeah, I mean, obviously the private sector has a huge role to play, and the monopolies shouldn't be monopolies, and because they're the ones that are creating the costs that are so disproportionate in this country compared to other countries. Certainly the conversations that I'm hearing is that there is a huge amount of effort to find new types of partnerships to drive support to communities and to populations in need, and that there's going to be a huge responsibility of public sector B Corps to do that. And yeah, and so similarly, it's kind of what is the role of philanthropy to scope that, to pilot those, to bring in corporate philanthropic partners and to test that. I think there's just so much innovation that's happening behind the scenes that will just boggle the mind. I'm an optimist at heart, but I do feel that there's a real opportunity. And I'm also very, very aware how, I think what Janet, you said, kind of how underprivilege has been unmasked and privilege has been unmasked. And so people are feeling like they have to do absolutely more at this moment, because to not do so is almost irresponsible. So I do see that we will probably see some great initiatives coming out.
Right, super. Thank you, Joanna. We're just about close to 1 o'clock Eastern. And with that, I'll thank you everyone so much for joining. I will turn it back over to Jenna to offer some thank yous and wrap up.
Yes. I just want to thank our incredible group of panelists for contributing their time to have this discussion and bring to light these issues that are facing our country and our communities. It was just such an enlightening talk, and thank you so much for being here and for giving us your time. I'm also grateful for the over 200 participants we had on this call. That was amazing. So thank you everyone so much for coming out and using your internet to be part of this conversation. And you know, membership is something that allows us to be able to do this. So Future of Good has membership subscriptions up on our website. That's how we're able to create these free webinars and bring this information to everybody. So if you are not yet a member of Future of Good, please head on over to our website, check out our monthly subscription package, and I'll be sending out links to everybody after the event with more information and a discount to get 3 months at a discounted rate, because we really want to have you with us during this pandemic. We're sharing some really great, really valuable information like webinars like this. So, and we know how important it is to have a community at this time. So that's really what we're up to creating over here at Future of Good. So thank you so much for being with us. I do hope you'll consider membership, and I hope that we get to see you again at our next webinar, which is April 28th. And we'll be sending out all the information for that as well. So thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day. And please keep these thoughts of internet access, of privilege, of the abilities we have to serve others front of mind as you continue your work this week and throughout the pandemic. So have a wonderful day, and we'll talk to you soon.
Thanks, bye.
Bye.